All right, Matt, it's finally time for our main event of the evening at 155 pounds between the Motown Phenom, Kevin Lee, and Dope Bronx, Charles Oliveira. Matt, this fight is awesome at 155 pounds, and I know the entire card, we've really been praising the matchmaking. And this is another one of those fights that makes just a ton of sense because Charles Oliveira is on a 6-fight win streak, 4 wins by submission, 2 by knockout, including his last 2 fights. This guy is a walking performance bonus. I mean, you look at it, 9 performance bonuses in the UFC. When they still had submission in the night, he got 3 of them. He has 3 fight of the nights, 2 of them against the Carney Nick Lentz. He's the all-time UFC submission champion, really. And you look at it, he has the 2nd most finishes in UFC history. That's Charles de Bronx. Now, the thing and the knock against him in this win streak is he didn't really fight the biggest of names and big ranked opponents. But I mean, lately he's looked absolutely amazing. He's taken on Kevin Lee, who's faced some very tough competition. And I know a lot of people were down on him when he lost to Ali Quinte. He moved up to 170. He lost against Rafael dos Anjos. But then he comes out against Gregor Gillespie in a fight that a lot of people predicted Gregor Gillespie to win. Gillespie possibly having superior wrestling. That did not matter in that fight one bit. Kevin Lee came out like he was going to light the entire world on fire.
One of the all-time great knockouts.
Awesome knockout, and really, he's in a great spot here. He's ranked 8th. You have Charles Oliveira ranked below him at 13th. But this one, Matt, it's such a fun fight. What do you see in this one?
So it's not that I can predict the future, but I did say after Kevin Lee beat Gregor Gillespie, you know what fight would be really cool? If he fought Charles Oliveira next. No big deal. I think this is such a fun fight, and I think it's a really cool main event too, because Charles Oliveira isn't really the type of guy you think, oh, they're in a main event against Kevin Lee, but it's just kind of cool to see how both guys' career progressed. Kevin Lee also didn't really fight great opposition until he got his first main event against Michael Chiesa. So just something to keep an eye out for. We don't know how good Charles Oliveira is until he fights all those top guys. So now that he is fighting top guys, yes, he has in the past different weight classes. Frankie Edgar comes to mind. Paul Felder, Max Holloway. He has fought high-level guys, but not really at lightweight since it's somewhat of a resurgence in his career. These guys are both finishers, though. Kevin Lee is one of the few guys who can submit Charles Oliveira, and Charles Oliveira is one of the few guys who can submit Kevin Lee. I know Kevin Lee has lost to Tony Ferguson and also RDA by submission. I don't know if this will be the same animal because Tony Ferguson and RDA are 2 very physically strong guys who can at least challenge Kevin Lee in that department because Kevin Lee's just, he's an absolute unit, really. Charles Oliveira is not really that type of grappler, though. Very slick. When you see the way he moves on the ground, it's really... This is a weird term, but it's beautiful to watch. It really is, because he floats on top. He makes you make mistakes. He gets into dominant positions just like that. He can go from your guard to your back in pretty much half a second. Not many guys can do that in the UFC. And now that his striking started coming along, I'm very excited for this.
Something that's going to be interesting, and you might want to take note of it, is typically when Charles Oliveira fights guys, whether it was at 45 or at 55, he usually has a bit of a height and a reach advantage. But in this fight, it's going to be very close, with Kevin Lee having a slight reach advantage. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects Charles Oliveira. Now, all of a sudden, he's found power in his hands, and he's knocking guys out. Again, 6 wins in a row, all of them finishes. He is more than deserving of this main 100%. Event slot against Kevin Lee, and I think, again, just continuing a trend of great matchmaking. Now, in terms of the odds, Kevin Lee coming in at a -140 favorite, Charles Oliveira +110. If you look over in Tapology, 55% of voters going with Charles Oliveira to win, so they're bucking the trend of the odds. 65% predicting him to win by submission. Do you agree with that?
Not at all. Here's the problem. If it's submission in round 4 or 5, maybe. If it's submission rounds 1 through 3, I think honestly Kevin Lee's more likely to pull off an early sub than Charles Oliveira, just due to the physical strength. If he gets Oliveira down and can get him in head and arm choke or anything like that, Kevin Lee's so much bigger than Charles Oliveira. That's the problem. You have a guy who's fought at 170 and a guy who's fought at 145. Kevin Lee will never be able to make 145 no matter what he does in his whole life. Charles Oliveira probably walks around near 170, so the size difference is going to be major in this fight. And with Kevin Lee's style, he's a very aggressive wrestler, but he's not a wrestler like Kamaru Usman or like Colby Covington, where he's going to wrestle, get on top. He's more of a back taker, and he uses his wrestling to get to someone's back. But I feel like he's going to have to kind of buck that trend and do what he did against Edson Barbosa, which is just some good old-fashioned ground and pound. And if he can get that off in this fight, sort of, Paul Felder was able to do it to Charles Oliveira. Paul Felder's a way better striker than both these guys, but Kevin Lee still has that ground and pound prowess. He's got the grappling. So if Kevin Lee decides to do a wrestling heavy approach, I do think for at least the first 15 minutes, he's going to have enough cardio and enough strength to sort of avoid the submissions on the ground from Oliveira. But once that fight does creep on, if no one gets finished in those first 15 minutes, Oliveira very likely is going to have the cardio advantage on his side. I really think he does, because Kevin Lee has good cardio, but when he faces resistance, his cardio doesn't get too well. He can fight at his speed for days, but once you do what Tony Ferguson does, for instance, make him make mistakes, let him have success, and then take it all away from him. You have to be like that with Kevin Lee, and I don't know if Charles Oliveira is the guy with that skill set.
The thing for me with Kevin Lee is you look at it, and it was a shame for not just the MMA community, but really Kevin Lee in general. The fact that he lost his coach, Robert Follis, and he was forced to kind of reevaluate and regroup. He had Dewey Cooper in his corner just primarily to help him out there in terms of striking, and he still has him in his corner, but it just didn't really go all that well. And then all of a sudden, he makes a move to TriStar. The weight issues weren't an issue in his last few fights, and he really put everything together. And the thing that a lot of people like to forget is that Edson Barboza fight where his wrestling was great, his striking was on point. You could say, well, you know, Edson Barboza a little long in the tooth, and you could say, well, he wants his way out of the UFC now. But in that point in time,
he had just fought Khabib for what was most likely a title eliminator. Like Edson Barboza, not even at one point, like even Edson Barboza now, no one wants to fight him, and if you can beat him up for 20 plus minutes and then stop him in the 5th, it's one of the more impressive things you can do.
So exactly, and that lends credence to this fight. Now, I don't want to take anything away from Charles Oliveira and those 6 wins in a row. I just think Kevin Lee's that upper echelon. Kevin Lee for a long time was the guy that a lot of people said, is this a guy that if he faces Khabib, he's able to get the win? And I'm firmly in that camp. I'd like to see that fight.
Josh Thompson openly says there's 2 hard fights for Khabib in this division, and he's one of his main training partners. Tony Ferguson, which we're hopefully going to see in a month, and Kevin Lee. So if you have that type of a guy who is so closely related to Khabib, and he knows his training, he knows him inside and out, giving Kevin Lee that kind of respect, it just tells you how good Kevin Lee is. Like you said, though, Charles Oliveira, if we wake up Sunday morning and Charles Oliveira won, like if I for some reason fell asleep, I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest. If he got him with a triangle, if he knocked him out, like it wouldn't be a surprising outcome. That's really how close this fight is. I just feel like Kevin Lee has a good skill set to combat Charles Oliveira.
Really looking forward to this fight. I know I'm going with Kevin Lee.
So am I.
Both going with Kevin Lee.
Great fight, though. This is fight of the night, probably.
Yeah, this is another great one. So many great fights on this card, so you're not going to want to miss the rest of our predictions. Our 5-minute one here for our main event, 2 minutes for the rest of the main card and the prelims with Fight Night Picks on YouTube, Matt.
Let's get into it.